So make sure you check out their banner webpage, web link on my page, thedougstewartshow.com, and join 7. All right, the number is 404-382-0338. That is the number to the show, and this is the Doug Stewart Show. And, man, just talking about everything that happened this past weekend. We're also talking about who's the most iconic guy in the history of your program. All right, that's what we're doing on today's show as well. And that's all in honor of the great Mean Joe Green. His number was retired this past weekend from the Pittsburgh Steelers, number 75. And evidently they don't do a lot of that because they got a ton of great players, and it took like 40 years before they retired Mean Joe Green's number. Like when I first saw that story, and you're listening to the Doug Stewart Show, I was like, huh? They just retired Mean Joe Green's number? Yeah, so like I said earlier, a lot of times teams don't do a lot of that because I guess you just don't want to run out of numbers. You know, the Dallas Cowboys, they don't retire anybody's number, you know. I thought it was the most insulting thing ever when I saw that the Cowboys gave Dez Bryant number 88. But then I thought about it, and I was like, the Cowboys gave Michael Irvin Drew Pearson's number 88 first. Yeah, so I looked it up, and yeah, Dallas, they do the Ring of Honor thing. They don't really retire jersey numbers, which I guess I kind of get because you just can't continue to retire everybody's number. You wouldn't have numbers left. But some guys, I think, numbers should be retired. Like, nobody else should wear said number, period. Like, nobody else should have had 75, and I don't know if anybody's off the top of my head has worn number 75 lately, but some guys should not, or some numbers shouldn't be worn by another player ever, period. And number 75 is one. You're listening to the Doug Stewart Show. Let's talk to my man Carl. Carl is at Ron Smith's Barbershop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I wanted to talk to somebody, a boots-on-the-ground guy, a BOGG in Pittsburgh, man, and get his thoughts on how good the Steelers are playing right now, and also his thoughts on the most iconic Pittsburgh Steeler players of all time, okay? And so we're going to talk to my man Carl here in a second as soon as we get him back on the line. And this is the Doug Stewart Show. The number is 404-382-0338. 404-382-0338 is the number to the show. And it's a Mad Dog Monday, all right? And we got a lot of chat as well before we work out this phone thing with Carl and get Carl back on the line. There's also a lot of conversation in the chat room on the DougStewartShow.com about greatest players from a particular organization or from a particular team. From John Marshall, he says Rockets, Akeem the Dream Olajuwon. Yeah, I mean 100% agree. And there's been good players, Clyde Drexler, Kenny Smith and those guys. But none of those guys even come close to being the most iconic player in that franchise's history compared to Akeem Olajuwon. So I get that. From Jersey Vern, he says Cartwright started with the Knicks shanty. Okay, I don't know what that's talking about. I guess they're talking about in the chat room about, Bill Cartwright. Bill Cartwright's not the most iconic player for any team, Knicks or the Bulls. And you know who the Bulls is. It's clearly Michael Jordan. That's not even close. Jordan's the most iconic player in basketball history, any team. Yeah. I'd say clearly it's Michael Jordan. For Scotty, he says not a Knicks fan, but those, or not a NASCAR fan, but those NASCAR derogatory term, get a buster too for fighting about the race yesterday. Had that been other guys, some guys with more melanin in their skin, it would have been all kind of names being called thug, this, that, and the other. I get the point of what he's saying. And he's right. Jeff Gordon's fighting some guy, and I saw the story. They have some type of fight, one of those NASCAR fights after the race. And, yeah, it's not talked about and being reported the same way if two guys, if a dude after a basketball game in the NBA went to the locker room of another guy and had a fist fight, and there were, 10, 20 people involved, it would be reported much differently than the way these NASCAR fights get reported. Let's just put it like that. I mean, let's just be real about it. So that is kind of strange and kind of disheartening when you think about that, but I know exactly what you're saying, Scotty. 404-382-0338, that is the number to the show, and this is the Doug Stewart Show. And so we're talking about everything from this past weekend, getting your ballers and your buster. Let me see, from who do we got here? Bernard King was better than both of those guys. And I guess he's talking about Willis Reed or Patrick Ewing. when that question came up earlier, who's the guy from said team? All right, how about this? How about a team that's kind of new? The Charlotte Hornets. Now, would it be Alonzo Mourning, who actually played a lot of his career in Miami? Would it be Larry Johnson, a.k.a. Grandmama, who played a lot of his career in New York? Would it be Muggsy Bogues? Maybe it's Muggsy Bogues because that's what we most recognize Muggsy with, that particular team. Maybe it's one of those guys. Maybe it's Muggsy because those guys have a lot of notoriety from playing for other teams. And it's kind of like that question you get when you're talking about Deion Sanders. And people tried to call earlier and hit me on the text line, the chat line, saying Deion is the face or the most iconic player in Falcons history. The problem I have with it is the same problem you have when you talk about the Charlotte Hornets is Deion played for the San Francisco 49ers. He played for the Dallas Cowboys of more note. And I think most people, if they talk about Deion Sanders, I think most people recognize and associate Deion Sanders with Dallas for whatever reason, because he won a ring in San Francisco. He won rings in Dallas, obviously. Didn't win a ring in Atlanta, but this is the team that drafted him. And the Falcons really don't have a lot of players on that status to really brag about. But I think if you poll most people, they would say Deion's more associated with Dallas. Then Deion played for who else? The Redskins. He played for the Ravens. So Deion was one of those hired guns too. I don't even know if those other teams, Dallas and San Francisco, would even regard Deion as one of their own. You know, he's the guy that just went where the money was, and he helped teams win championships. So he's kind of like, you know, a refugee of teams, you know. And so I think the Falcons would love to claim him, but would he want the Falcons to claim him? You know what I'm saying? And it's just kind of dicey with him. So I don't know. What about the Charlotte Hornets? Who would it be? What about the Miami Dolphins? You know, is it Dan Marino clearly, even though Dan Marino wasn't part of the 72 team that went undefeated? You know, would it be Bob Greasy? No, I don't think so. Bob Greasy wasn't that great of a player. So, yeah, that's another one that I think that you could have a debate about. And you're listening to the Doug Stewart Show. I think it would be Dan Marino ultimately, though, because Dan Marino is a guy that you say the greatest player in the history of the Miami Dolphins team, even though he didn't win a ring. So I think it would be Dan Marino. What about the Cleveland Browns, who get another win this weekend, by the way? Shouts out to the Cleveland Browns doing the damn thing. They're winning. I mean, you can't get mad at them for that. The Cleveland Browns get it done this weekend. I'll talk about them a little bit more in the next segment as we will break down and kind of take a quick look at all the games from this past weekend. But, yeah, I mean, clearly for the Cleveland Browns, it's Jim Brown. Yes, and they've had I don't know. Who are their quarterbacks? Brian Sipe? Yeah. So they've had some good players, but nobody definitely on the level of Jim Brown. Jim Brown's one of the only guys, and you're listening to the Doug Stewart Show, he's one of the only guys in sports, or one of the few guys in sports, that played so long ago, and the game has evolved, and the game has changed, and athletes are different. I think the athletes are better today, obviously. The athletes are bigger, stronger, and faster. But Jim Brown's one of those guys, or one of the only guys in sports, in any sport, that you can put up on the same pedestal as the younger guys, as far as would he be able to play in today's NFL. Even though, you know, back when he played, the offensive linemen were the size of linebackers. You know, now the offensive linemen are like 2 times the size they were back then. But Jim Brown is a guy that you think could play in today's NFL no problem. He's one of the only guys. So, yeah, clearly for the Cleveland Browns, it's Jim Brown, yes. What about the Houston Oilers? Somebody hit me up earlier and said before that organization left town and went to Tennessee and subsequently come back to the city of Houston as another franchise, that Houston Oilers is going to be Earl Campbell. And I agree with that 100%. It's Earl Campbell. Who else would you have a decision about? Would it be, I don't know, Dan Pastorini? That name just came to my mind. No, so clearly it's Earl Campbell for the Houston Oilers. Yeah, it's Earl Campbell. Definitely it'd be Earl Campbell. And they've had some very good players over the years. The guy that used to return the kicks, was it Billy White Shoes Johnson that played for the Falcons? I think, yeah, he played for the Houston Oilers as well, but just doesn't have the the panache of the great Earl Campbell, who's just a beast. And that's another guy that probably is interesting. I talked about Jim Brown and being able to play in today's NFL. That's another guy, Earl Campbell, that still his game is functional in today's league. When you're that big and that strong and that fast, and Earl Campbell used to walk away from dudes. Don't get it twisted. Earl Campbell didn't get run down a lot, by defensive backs who you would think would be faster. The footage that you can find right now, if Earl Campbell broke away, he was gone. At all 250, 240-something pounds that he was back during that era of football. So Earl Campbell definitely. John Marshall. Oh, John Marshall just reminded me, and you're listening to the Doug Stewart Show. John Marshall says, what about Warren Moon? Yeah. And it's the same problem that you have with other guys. Is, yes, Warren Moon, played for the Houston Oilers, but first of all, he started his career in Canada, which was bad. We'll get into that conversation another day. But he started his career in Canada, then he played for the Oilers. But he also had prominent years with the Minnesota Vikings. And I think he finished his career with the Seattle Seahawks, who he's from Seattle, I believe. And so, when you think of Earl Campbell, you think born and bred Houston Oiler. And you know what? It's probably would be split right down the middle if you polled Houston Oiler fans. The team hadn't been around in, 25 years. If you polled Houston Oiler fans, it might be a split. That might be one of those where it's more close than you would think. The voting is more close than you would think as far as if you're saying Earl Campbell. I think that Warren Moon, thank you, John Marshall, for that. I think Warren Moon might be in that running for greatest Houston Oiler of all time. Maybe Steve McNair. Maybe not, because Steve McNair, I think he only played 1 or 2 years with the Oilers before they moved to Tennessee. Now, if you say the greatest Tennessee Titan, then yes, it probably would be Steve McNair. I do get that. I think Steve McNair would be that guy. 404-382-0338, 404-382-0338. You can also email me at doug@thedugstewartshow.com. From William Mack, would the Celtics be Russell or Bird? Ooh! Ooh, you're listening to the Doug Stewart Show. Wow. I might have to even think about that. I am literally scratching my head right now. I am scratching my head right now on that Russell or Larry Bird. Larry Legend. I mean, the guy's name is Larry Legend. And being a white guy in Boston doesn't hurt. I mean, let's be honest. Let's keep it real. I mean, Bill Russell's got 11 rings? But 11 rings might get trumped by a white guy that had a silky smooth jump shot playing in Boston. It might. I don't know. Let me think about that for a second. When we get back from the break, I'll tell you who I think Boston Celtics fan would say is their most recognized or their most iconic player when we get back from the break. Don't go away. It's the Doug Stewart Show. Damn, Bill Russell, Larry Bird. Oh, come on. So you think you're a fantasy whiz, huh? Well, prove it and make some nice scratch at the same time. Scratch is money. What do you know about FanDuel? FanDuel packs the thrill of a whole season in 1 week. Play in 1 week fantasy football leagues for free money with immediate cash payouts. The money is real with no season-long commitment. That's huge because when your team starts to suck, you don't want to play no more. It's no more fun. Trade everybody. I've been there. You play when and how much you want. Deposit now and FanDuel will match it up to $200. Use the promo code COOLER, that's COOLER, and take advantage of free loot to get your game on. FanDuel, where every week is a new season. The Doug Stewart Show is off and running. But just like every company, we need sponsors. Would yours like to work with one of the livest, most dynamic, and recognized sports talk dudes in America? By the way, I'm talking about myself. Getting in on the ground floor? Well, call us at 770-847-0536 or email me at doug@thedugstewartshow.com and let's do business. From the smallest company in Atlanta to the biggest brands nationally and worldwide, shawty, people know me and the Stews brand in these streets. Holla at your boy.
Once again, the number is 770-847-0536 or email me at doug@thedugstewartshow.com.